My name is Maitline. It was 12 years ago when I first crossed paths with James at a business networking event, a moment that would set the stage for a tale of reckoning. He held a prestigious position at a trading company, charismatic, sharp-witted, with a gaze that disarmed me completely. What truly captivated me, however, was the way he spoke of his 13-year-old daughter, Sarah. The passion in his voice when he uttered her name was undeniable. I had forged my empire of beauty salons from nothing. Triumph had gifted me countless accolades, yet it left me yearning for the one thing that truly mattered, a family. Accepting the bitter truth of my inability to bear children had become a part of my existence, a wound I had learnt to mask. But encountering James and Sarah ignited a spark of retribution within me. 6 months after our vows, they took up residence in my home. The gap in earnings between James and me was significant. Though I earned far more than he ever could, it never stirred any feelings within me. Love transcends wealth, and I felt a deep sense of fulfillment in finally embracing the family I had longed for. When Sarah turned 16, I gifted her first car, a safe, reliable model that ignited her delight and laughter. "Is this truly my possession?" she pleaded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she clung to me tightly. "I appreciate it, Maitline. You're the ultimate." 2 years later, when letters of acceptance for colleges started to arrive, I jumped at the chance to offer to cover her tuition. Though it was hardly Harvard, Sarah felt happy at this decent university. Early on, those years were lovely. We felt good. I had the house full of laughter, a loving husband, and a stepdaughter who seemed to value me, all the things I had ever desired. Saying she wanted to start her profession with money saved, Sarah even stayed with us after college. I will never forget that spring evening Sarah arrived home, almost radiant with enthusiasm. I knew Michael from 2 years of dating. She had been courting him as a respectable young man working as a software engineer. He treated her like a princess. Still, I was actually taken aback when she came through the door, raising her left hand with a diamond ring glittering on it. "Dad, Maitland," he said. "Proposal," she cried, bouncing on her toes as though she were 16 once again rather than 25. "We are going to be married." James leaped to embrace her, and I stood there smiling like a moron. I had always dreamed of having exactly the kind of family moment this one offered. Later that evening, Michael dropped by and we opened a champagne bottle I had been saving for a big occasion. Looking tense as she fumbled with her engagement ring, Sarah stated, "I know this is a big ask, but we have been considering sites and everything else." "How much?" Already grabbing for my phone to check my accounts, I asked. Quietly, she answered, "Well, with everything included, around $150,000, then hurried to add, "But of course, we don't expect." "Done," I said, flashing a smile. "I'll open an account for all the wedding costs tomorrow you can access." Every dollar was well worth it based on the comfort and happiness on her face. "Really? Maitline, oh my God. Really, thanks." Remembering that teenage girl who had initially embraced me into her life, I tightly held her back as she flung her arms around me. The next several weeks were a frenzy of activity. Initially, Sarah involved me in everything. Late into the evening, we would sit at the kitchen table reviewing Pinterest boards and wedding publications. She would ask my view on color schemes and send me images of clothes she was thinking about. Showing me pictures of complex bouquets, she would ask, "What do you think about these flowers?" "Too much." "Too little." I would say, "I love the pink peonies," and she would mark something in her wedding planner. She came upon her dream garment, a gorgeous designer gown worth more than my first vehicle. Not even at the price tag did I blink. Her eyes brightened as she tried it, and it was worth every cent. She selected a magnificent venue, an opulent historic hotel downtown with marble flooring and crystal chandeliers. Her chosen menu highlighted excellent cuisine fit for any food critic. As promised, I moved the money. Sarah jumped into the plans with great energy. But then something changed roughly 2 months into the preparations. The thorough updates grew shorter and less clear. She would dash through supper and vanish into her room or head to Michael's house instead of our long planning meetings. "How is the planning turning out?" I would pose questions. "Fine," she would say, without turning her head from her phone. "Everything is on schedule." She would offer non-committal responses when I asked for more particular information. Just finishing some things. Not too concerned. Everything is under control. I reminded myself not to let this slowdown of inclusion cause damage. Planning a wedding is demanding after all, and she was most likely overburdened. Perhaps she wanted some time to make her own decisions. I thought of my early years and how I wanted to show everyone I could manage on my own. One evening as we prepared for bed, James sensed my anxiety. "Everything good?" he inquired. "You look concerned." Still trying to smile, I said, "I'm probably just being silly. It's just, Sarah seems different nowadays, more remote." "She's just busy with the wedding," he said, kissing my forehead. "You understand how many intricacies there are to handle. Try to relax." I nodded and tried to discount my worries, but I had a persistent sense in my stomach that something seemed off. The content bubble we had been inhabiting seemed to be beginning to show small fractures, and I couldn't get rid of the impression that this was only the beginning. Over the course of the weeks, I resolved to once more participate actively in the wedding preparation. One morning over coffee, I asked casually something that had been on my mind. Watching her flip through her phone, "Sarah, honey, I was wondering about the guest list," I remarked. "Have you worked out how many you are inviting?" She glanced momentarily. "Oh, definitely. We are keeping it modest, about 50 individuals." "That's good." Direct. I nodded and said, "I would want to include my sister and parents. They would be delighted to be there. They have always loved you." Sarah's look changed right away and shockingly. Her face stiffened, and she deliberately slowed down her phone drop. "We are only inviting close relatives and friends, really. This should be a somewhat intimate celebration. People that aren't really relatives are not something I wish to have included." The words knocked me like freezing water. After 12 years and all we had shared, my family was not really family to her. Breathing deeply, I tried to keep my voice soft. "Sarah, although I respect your desire to keep things close, my parents have known you since you turned 13. They have attended your graduation and every birthday." I stopped and then said softly, "And I am paying for the whole wedding. We can surely make an exception for 3 persons who really know you." Her expression turned immediately into a pout, and at the mention of money I could see the wrath flash in her eyes. She pushed her chair more forcefully than required from the table. "Fine," she said in a snap. "I will invite your mother and sister. Good right now." She snatched her phone and hurried out of the kitchen before I could reply. Few minutes later, I heard the front door slam. James entered our bedroom that evening with that expression that suggested I would not enjoy what he had to say. Sitting on the edge of our bed, he started, "We need to talk about what happened with Sarah today." "Okay," I murmured, setting down my book. "What about it?" "She gave me a call earlier, crying, said you treated her quite angrily about the guest list. She's staying at Michael's tonight since she's so offended." I looked at him in shock. "To her, James, rude to her? She informed me that my family was not allowed at her wedding, a wedding I am paying for, and when I spoke with her about it, I stayed very composed." "I know, but perhaps you might treat her a little more gently," he advised. "With the wedding planning, she is under a lot of stress." Word for word, I described exactly what had happened and could see him working through it. Usually when he was troubled, he ran his hand through his hair. "Okay," he answered at last. "I understand what you are saying. She should hear about it tomorrow." The next 2 weeks went under a tense calm. Sarah had come home and was behaving as though nothing had happened, talking about wedding plans over breakfast and once more asking my view of centerpieces. But something seemed strange, like the peace before a tempest. Then, during supper, arrived the bombshell. "Mom found out about the wedding," Sarah replied, pushing her noodles around her plate. "She is now back in town." I choked almost on my wine. James's fork clattered across his dish. Sarah's mother, Linda, had hardly been visited in our house in 12 years. I knew the basics. She'd had a drinking issue, which resulted in the divorce. Then she moved to Arizona and basically left Sarah behind without birthday cards, Christmas calls, nothing. "She truly wants to help with the wedding planning," Sarah said, her voice sharp and full of an intensity I couldn't grasp. Actually, I asked her over for supper this weekend. Here my hand tightened around my wine glass. This was my house, the place I had paid for with my own funds, where I had made our shared home. Before inviting someone over, especially someone with Linda's past, Sarah would have been better off getting permission. But bit my tongue remembering the guest list dispute. Another clash was not worth it. James sat there silently, suddenly quite fascinated in his pasta. I spent hours cooking the ideal dinner that weekend: homemade bread, roasted vegetables, herb-crusted lamb rack. Though I couldn't understand why I felt the need to wow a mom who had dropped her daughter, I wanted everything to be perfect. Linda came 30 minutes late exactly. Like Sarah, she was tall and blonde, but with rough edges, while Sarah was gentle. Her eyes searched every square inch of my house as she moved in, lingering on the furniture, artwork, window view. I identified the gaze, poorly veiled as evaluation. Emphasizing large in a way that sounded like an insult, she exclaimed, "What a large house!" Dinner began reasonably well, but it did not remain that way. Linda chewed the lamb and pursed her lips. She said, cutting another piece with great slowness, I always made this with rosemary and garlic. It definitely accentuates the taste more effectively. Sarah used to adore it when I cooked it." Saved a sip of wine and said nothing. She said, tossing these vegetables around her plate, "And these vegetables, they're a bit overdone, aren't they? Maintaining their crispness always makes them far more appealing, in my experience." With every critique, I watched for James to respond, anything. He knew well who she was and what she was doing. He had been married to this woman. He kept his eyes on his plate, though, cutting his food into ever smaller bits. While my husband stood mute and my stepdaughter beaming at her long-lost mother, as if she had hummed the moon, I sat there watching this woman criticize my cuisine in my own house. Something inside me changed, grew hard. Linda turned to Sarah as dinner drew to an end and dabbed her lips with her serviette. "Tell me the venue, honey, please. Which hotel did you decide on?" "The Grand Morris in downtown," Sarah said, glowing at the shift of topic. "Mom, it's lovely. In the Grand Morrison, they feature these magnificent crystal chandeliers." Linda's face became twisted with disgust. "You cannot hold your wedding there, sweetheart. That location is very simple today. You should be enjoying this at Belmont Plaza, considerably more prestigious." Knowing the Belmont Plaza price almost doubled what we were already spending, I tightened my fork. "The wedding we're planning isn't exactly cheap," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Grand Morrison is a great location." Linda's eyes grew narrow. "Well, on your only daughter's wedding, you cannot take shortcuts. That day marks the most significant turning point in her life." I snapped something inside of me. 12 years of love, support, and financial sacrifice chopped down by a lady who hadn't sent her daughter so much as a birthday card. "If you're so worried about the venue, I responded, staring her straight. Feel free to pay for the Belmont Plaza yourself. Given that I am the one paying the whole $150,000 for this wedding, I believe the Grand Morrison will be really good. The quiet that followed was intolerable. The face of Linda flushed red. She got up so fast that her chair scratched across the floor. Announcing, "I can see I'm not welcome here," she reached for her pocketbook. "Sarah, call me tomorrow, honey." She ran out, the front door slamming behind her. Sarah spun on me, her face twisted with fury. She called out, "How dare you? How dare you toss the money like that in Mom's face? You destroyed everything and are selfish and nasty." She dashed upstairs, and I heard her door bang too. Stalled there, shocked, James helped himself to another glass of wine. He arrived in our bedroom looking austere late that evening. "You have to say, Sarah, apologies," he said. "What you told Linda was absolutely out of line." I stared at him incredulously. "Express regret for what?" "Speaking the truth. After criticizing everything I did, your ex-wife came into my house and then advised I was being cheap about a wedding I'm paying for totally on my own. Still, you didn't have to humiliate her like that, and Sarah is now agitated as well." "I'm not apologizing," I said with great conviction. "Not this time." He picked up his cushion. "Wonderful. I'll sleep in the living room till you come to your senses." My phone rang following morning while I was alone in the kitchen preparing coffee. It was my mother. Her voice worried. She said, "Maddie, honey, I wanted to ask about Sarah's wedding. The date and site are what? Neither Jenny nor Dad or I have yet received an invitation." I assumed they vanished from the mail. After my mother's call, I spent hours seated at the kitchen counter with my coffee cold next by. As I waited, the early sun slunk across the floor, and my resentment grew with every minute. About 11, I found Sarah's key in the lock. She had been out presumably with Linda since breakfast. "Sarah!" I cried out, my voice firm, even though I was boiling with resentment. "We must talk." She, still in yesterday's clothes, entered the kitchen. She asked, not exactly looking at me, "What is it?" Watching her look closely, I added, "I just got a call from my mother. She was wondering about the apparently never-arrived wedding invitations." Sarah's face became stiff, a sight I had not seen before. She raised her chin deliberately in defiance. "I'm not extending invitations to them." "Excuse me." She said, each syllable purposefully nasty, "I'm not inviting strangers to my wedding." The phrase, strangers, struck me like a punch physically. For 12 years, my parents had been at every Christmas, every birthday, every turning point. Sarah had been supported by my sister in getting ready for her college interviews. "Strangers? That's untrue, Sarah," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady, "and it looks bad. These folks have loved you and helped you for years." She laughed, a loud, bitter sound I had never heard from her before. "Would you like to discuss ugly? Following what you did to my mother last night." Her eyes glowed with wrath. "Actually, you know what? Neither do I want you at my wedding." Time stopped, seemed to be happening. Except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, the kitchen went quiet. 12 years of love, support, and sacrifice compressed into one moment. "Let me make sure I understand," I said softly. "You do not want me, the person footing your entire wedding expenses, to show up?" Rising her chin, she remarked, "That's right." I had an unusual serenity come over me. Perfect clarity crystallized all the pain and resentment of the preceding few weeks. I grinned, which appeared to scare her just a little. "That's fine," I responded, my voice delightfully light. "I wouldn't show up for your wedding." I moved upstairs to my home office without another word. As I entered onto my banking app and denied Sarah access to the wedding account, my hands hardly shook at all. Less than a minute, just a few clicks to destroy what had taken 12 years to create. I next gave Robert, the wedding planner, a call. On the second ring, he responded, "Robert, this is Madeline Harrison. I need you to call off all the wedding plans." He sounded confused and asked, "Excuse me, is everything all right?" "No, it's not," I responded sincerely, "but it will be. Kindly stop everything and handle the return into my account." My call next was the Grand Morrison. The events manager was contrite but firm. They were unable to reimburse the deposit for the already ordered food and beverages. Though a few thousand were lost at that instant, it seemed like money well spent. That evening, the home was still. James stayed asleep in the living room. As I got ready for bed, I could hear him moving about the couch. I realized I was not depressed anymore as I laid there by myself in darkness. I became free. I went slowly getting ready the following morning. For what I knew would be a challenging day, I selected my best blue silk blouse and pearl earrings, ornaments. The storm broke right away when I at last went downstairs for breakfast. Already visibly waiting for me, Sarah and James were at the kitchen table. Sarah sprung to her feet as soon as I arrived, her face flushed with rage. "What did you do?" she cried. "How dare you call off my wedding? How dare you to restrict my access to the account? That money came for my wedding." My fingers steady, I poured myself a cup of coffee. I answered simply, sipping, "I'm not going to sponsor a wedding I'm not invited to." "You are incapable of doing this." Tears started to flow down Sarah's face as her voice got higher. "You'd have destroyed everything, the venue, the flowers, the dress, all gone." I laid my coffee cup gently down. "Actually, I am able to achieve this. I did as well. Ask the individuals you really want at your wedding to pay for it." Sarah's face creased. She staggered out the kitchen, breathing a terrible sob. Her bedroom door slammed after her, thundering up the stairs. James stood slowly, his face black with rage. He growled, "Fix this. Right now. I'll file for divorce, call everyone back, reactivate the account, and organize everything once more." 12 years of marriage reduced to this moment hung in the air between us. Looking at the man I had loved, I genuinely looked at him and wondered why I had never seen this side of him before. "Okay," I answered coolly. "File a divorce application. I have no objections about it." His face started to lose color. He obviously had not expected this answer. "Madeline, you could not be serious." "I am," I declared, "and since this is my house, I'd like you and Sarah to leave by tomorrow." His resentment collapsed like a ruptured balloon. "Look," he murmured, his voice abruptly soft. I responded too strongly. "We should discuss this and give some thought." The remainder of the day went in a haze of closed doors and subdued conflict. James and Sarah showed up in the lobby carrying bags upstairs at precisely 7 that evening. Red and swollen from tears, Sarah's eyes. She spitted, "I never thought you could be so nasty." I laughed, a real laugh of incredulity rising within me. "Cruelty. I paid for your car, your clothes, your schooling. I handed you a house, loved you like my own daughter, and prepared to spend $150,000 on your wedding. And you have the guts to call me nasty because I won't let you treat me like dirt." With a quiet click, the door closed behind them, much softer than all the furious smashes of the last several days. Perched in my doorway, I listened to the quiet in my house. The house seemed lighter, however, as though a weight I had not known I was carrying had been taken off. Over the first few days, I rearranged areas and reclaimed rooms that had gradually filled with Sarah's belongings over years. Like healing an old wound, it was therapeutic. Then Michael's mother delivered her word. One evening, as I was savoring a bottle of wine on my terrace, it showed up on my social media. "I hope you realize what you have done," the note said. "Your behavior could cause this wedding to fall apart totally. How can you be so callous?" I responded slowly and chose my words deliberately. I texted back, "I'm not heartless. I'm simply done being treated disrespectfully. I refuse to pay for a wedding I am not even invited to attend. If your preoccupation with the success of the wedding drives you to pay for it yourself." She ignored the message even though she read it. I saw her seated there, most likely as startled as James had been, and I wouldn't waver. People's reactions when you at last defend yourself, like they cannot quite believe you have stopped following their rules, are interesting. The following day I called my attorney. She had assisted me in drafting the prenup 12 years ago, and today she would be helping me to dissolve the marriage it had preserved. Within a week, the divorce paperwork were ready. James tried his old strategies once more when I phoned to let him know they were ready. "Madeline, please," he pleaded, his voice gentle and begging, the sound that used to melt my heart. "We are free to start afresh. This is something we can correct." I put it up. The following morning he came to pick up the newspaper. He seemed worn out and aged somehow. The competent man who had threatened me with divorce vanished, replaced by someone seemed lost. He remarked, standing in my foyer, no longer our foyer, that Sarah has been crying nonstop. Now City Hall will host the wedding. Just a plain ceremony, no reception, no flowers, no extravagant clothes. I shrugged, thinking back on all the tears I had dropped over their treachery. That's not my dilemma. How can you be so issy about this? It's not chilly, James. Simply said, I now have less responsibilities. He grabbed the docks and went. I watched him drive away after walking to his newly purchased automobile. Though not depressing, it seemed final, just completed. 2 months later was the divorce finished. Everything was simple because to the prenup, he could not touch my house, my company, any of my possessions. I occasionally questioned whether he had ever actually read the document, that is, whether he knew what it meant to sign it 12 years ago. Now it was irrelevant. Sometimes people ask me whether I know how Sarah's wedding went, whether she wore the dress she had selected, whether Linda was present, if it was exactly what she had dreamed of. To be honest, I have no idea. I changed my phone number, blocked them all on social media, and carried on living. You cannot purchase love, not true love either, what I know of. Respect or thanks or loyalty cannot be bought. With my checkbook, I spent 12 years attempting to start a family. Finally, all I got was a front row view to see that family pick someone else over me. The thing with endings, though, is that they also mark commencement. Now in my house is tranquilly. My company is doing really nicely. I too do not feel lonely when I sit in my garden with morning coffee and see the sunrise over my flowers. I'm free.